This lesson is all about an overview and introduction at a basic level to pivot tables. Now, a pivot table allows you to analyze data and get statistical information from a data set. Now, on the screen you'll see we've got a sample data list, often referred to as a database in Excel, columns of data. Now, before we start building a pivot, let's just understand what we have in our sample data. We have the names of our employees, what gender they are, male or female, when they were born, which location within the company they work. We have branches in Manchester, Bristol, Liverpool and London. We also have different departments within the organisation: payroll, sales, engineer. We have the salary they are paid, and we have what grade of employee they are. So that's our sample data. Now, to pivot this, we can convert this layout into something that looks similar to this, where we have titles across the top. These are column titles, these are row titles, and we have formula and data at the intersection here. So to create our pivot table, you click anywhere within the data set. You don't need to highlight it, you just need to click somewhere within. You then move to the insert ribbon, and the very first button is pivot table. We shall click on that, and the box that appears, we don't need to change anything in here. You can see it's selected the table for us. You can correct it if it's wrong, but it will pick up the table data. You can use external data as well. And at the bottom there's information about where it's going to build your pivot, on an existing sheet or a new worksheet. By default, Excel will always build it on a new worksheet. When you click OK, it puts the new sheet in and a couple of things appear. We have an empty pivot table on the new sheet. Over at the far right we have a list of all of the headings, often referred to as field names. We have 4 boxes here: filters, columns, rows, values. And there's also 2 new ribbons at the top: Analyze and Design. If you're working on an earlier version prior to 2013, then you will have 3 ribbons, but you have the similar button layout on each ribbon. To create a pivot, you decide where you want data to appear, and you do a drag and drop. Now, for example, we want to know how much salary we pay out to each of our departments within the company. We can drag and drop department into the rows box. You'll see that gives us one of each of our departments as row titles. We then drag the salary and drop it into values. This will do the calculation for us and show us the totals for the salaries. You've now got a pivot table. Now, pivot tables are often used on what we call dashboards, front end of Excel, because of the compact nature and flexibility they give. Now, a pivot table is linked to the data in our original database here on the other sheet. Anything that changes in here will reflect in here. However, if it's live data that you're after, you may have to refresh the pivot table, and you do that by moving your mouse over the pivot and clicking the right mouse button, and you can choose refresh. and that will refresh the data of the pivot. Now we may want to add more data to this. For example, we've got our departments. It'd be interesting to see how much salary we pay out to each department within each location. And we can do that by dragging the location field and putting it into the columns. So if we grab the location, drag and drop it into columns, you can now see that it's put along the top as column headers: Bristol, Liverpool, London, Manchester. Now pivot tables are very flexible. You may want to change the view you're looking at but keep the same information. And this is again drag and drop. If we look down here, you may decide to have the locations and departments as row headings together. If I grab hold of location with my mouse and drag it, I'm going to drop it. You'll see it displays a thick line. I can drop it above or below department. I'm going to drop it above department. So we now have location and department. Looking at the pivot table, you can see how this layout appears. We have Bristol and its list of departments, Liverpool, its departments, London, departments, etc. Now we can move this back or change the layout. We may decide to have the departments going across the top. We can grab hold of department and drag and drop it into columns. And there we have the data on there. Now in terms of cosmetics, the formatting, you can use the built-in designs from Microsoft. Once you've done your layout and you've got all the information you need, you can then go to your design ribbon and choose one of the numerous presets that Microsoft have designed. We can build another pivot table very easily if we go back to our original data set. Insert ribbon, click on the pivot table button, OK the dialog box, and we're back to square one. We've got another new sheet with a new pivot table on. This time we may want to see how many people work for the organization. So if we drag the male or female field, remember that contains text, which means that when I drag any text into the values box, when it attempts to calculate, it will default to a count. If it's number values you drag into the box, it will do an auto sum. So it's counted the number of records, which equates to the number of employees we have, 57. Now we may want to break that down as to how many people work in each department. So we drag the department down into rows. This now breaks it down. And we can go one stage further. You can use fields from here more than once. So we may want to separate the men and the women that work for us into two columns. So if I drag the MF field again and drop it into columns, it now gives us two columns. I can widen that column there. So we've now got all of the females and all of the males that work for us. Now there's one part of the pivot that we haven't looked at, which is filters. We can filter the data as well. For example, we may want to filter to see only those staff numbers in London or Bristol. If we drag location into filters box, it's currently showing all of these, but if we click on the little drop down, you'll see it's put this little filter at the top. We can choose to see the staff that work in London. Click OK, and now you'll see the pivot reflects that filtered data. We can show all to bring back all of the records. Now, as well as moving these around individual boxes, we can transfer them into a different layout. You can also pull these out to remove them. So if I didn't want the filter anymore, I could grab hold of it and pull it out onto the sheet, and that will remove it. If I no longer want to see the department breakdown, I can pull that out as well. And you can see it's just giving me the total of men and women that work for us. So dragging and dropping is the flexibility nature of pivot tables. Returning to a previous pivot table we looked at, there's some useful features here in that you can find out how a number is arrived at. For example, if we focus on this value here, it's £80,000 that we pay out in salaries to all of the sales department in the London branch. If I want to know who makes up that 80,000, is that one person, 2, 3 or 4, we can do what's called drill down. We can double click on that number. What happens is that Excel puts a new sheet in and it transfers all of the London sales data onto a separate sheet. Now this has been made into an Excel table. It's not linked in any way to either the pivot or the original database we started with. This is a standalone table.